I don't think anyone's really expecting a magical solution to all of this by the end of the weekend, but can we at least say they're going to have a nice picture together and things have stopped getting worse?
Well, good morning, and thank you very much for having me on. The fundamental gaps between the two countries have not disappeared, and indeed Chinese positions have grown harder since the addition of Huawei to the Department of Commerce's entities list. And therefore, I think it would be unrealistic to see a gapping of the fundamental differences between the two sides. If there were to be a truce and a handshake, an agreement not to continue additional tariffs, then that would be a step forward.
Yeah, you mentioned those extra companies which are now being watched by the US, and Huawei, of course, perhaps the biggest sticking point of them all. And we had a story on Bloomberg that some Huawei employees have been working on Chinese military projects. So has the rhetoric on this got to a point where it's getting very, very hard to climb down in any sort of face-saving way?
Well, there are a good number of ways to look at this. Firstly, there is Huawei and whether or not they have broken American law. Another way to look at it is about technology overall. There are considerable differences of interpretation of the WTO. What are the rules of the road for competition? What are the rules of the road for cooperation? And perhaps even more difficult is how do you enforce those rules? On top of that, there are cybersecurity concerns associated with Huawei and overall national security concerns on top of that. So this is a multi-dimensional problem which defies easy or quick resolution.
And in the meantime, you have more and more people in D.C. where you are turning into China hawks and really wanting this issue to be resolved, to be fundamentally resolved. So is there any hope at the moment that this can actually be resolved in the next few months, or will this continue, and could this evolve into what can be called economic iron curtain, as the former Treasury Secretary Hank Paulson said last year?
Well, with any complex problem, the only rational way to go about it is to divide it into incremental parts and resolve each of them one at a time. And in this particular case, what that would involve would be addressing and resolving the 301 negotiations that were initiated about a year ago, focused on a small subset of the issues. And those are subsidies, state-owned enterprises, forced technology transfer, and intellectual property rights, along with cybersecurity. So I think that if the two governments remain focused on that subset of issues, that yes, there could be an agreement, and if we did have an agreement, that would benefit both China and the United States. We can get to yes with the political will of both leaders.
What does this also mean for the future relationship of companies that have been doing business both in the U.S. and China? We had former Ambassador Bob Hormats in the last hour, and he was telling us that once supply chains are severed, that it would be very difficult to restore them.
Well, I have enormous respect for Ambassador Hormats, and I agree with him completely. I think we need to disaggregate here the tech community and the rest of trade. The rest of trade, be it food or energy or fashion or services, virtually 90%. I think that there's no reason that we can't resolve our differences. The key areas of national security concern would be in tech alone. Now, that's big and it's important, and I would argue that it is not inevitable that we're going to have any decoupling at all. If we were able to reach agreement over the 301 issues, then that would go a long way towards addressing concerns on both sides. Both sides have commitments to the WTO. Both sides should meet those commitments to the WTO.